And we'll jump right into this multi-stakeholder panel. And what we'll be doing here is bringing forward a cross-sector dialogue on the CDA assessment framework for cancer biomarkers. So panelists will examine its practical implications and the deliberative processes required for national implementation, while sharing diverse perspectives on the framework's relevance, anticipated challenges, and opportunities for cross-sector alignment and collaboration. Please welcome Bill Dempster, President of 360 Public Affairs, who will be moderating this discussion. Bill is joined by Dr. Catalina Lopez-Correa, who is representing the patient perspective in this discussion, though she brings broad expertise as a breast cancer survivor, an advocate, physician, and genomics scientist. We have Dr. Laura Weeks, HTA Director at CDA, back with us engaging in this panel discussion. Dr. Charlene Gill, Medical Oncologist at BC Cancer and member of CRAN's Medical Advisory Board. Laura Greer, who also brings broad expertise as the Executive Vice President and Global Client Lead at Burson Canada, as well as a breast cancer patient and advocate. And I will be participating in this panel as well. So Bill, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Cassandra. It's kind of fun. You're the MC, and then now I'm going to become a panelist, and you put on another hat. Thank you, Philomena, and the team at CRAN for inviting me to help moderate. What an incredible panel we have of experts, people with lived experience, but also folks who have been within the healthcare system as clinicians. Laura, thank you for sticking around to participate in this session. This is where you're going to be able to get some questions, and not least of which is going to come from the panelists that we've got lined up for you. Laura, you did a great job of outlining the framework, how it's designed to bring more consistency, transparency, and equity to biomarker testing in Canada, while still being very Canadian, allowing for the provinces and territories and the federal government where that's applicable to implement these recommendations based on its own needs and healthcare system, just how they work across the country. And CRAN, you're doing an amazing job of helping contribute to that glue. In many ways, this is an essential part of when we say Canada has a healthcare system. When we were preparing for this call, there was some head shaken. It's different in British Columbia as it is in Ontario, as it is in Quebec. But to the extent that we do have a Canadian healthcare system, it is because of organizations like CDA. Conversely, also organizations like CRAN that actually help say this is how the system is working or not working. And so this is what the panel is going to be talking through, really anchored on what you started with, Laura. So thank you so much for that setup. So Catalina, I got to know you when you were at Genome Canada back in the day. You were the expert on the West Coast, but you had a national remit. You went from being, a genomics expert to also experiencing what it's like to live with cancer and navigate a really challenging system, but a system that's so exciting with some of the new technologies that are coming forward and the ways to actually move you in a direction that might be personalized to your actual cancer needs. So we're going to kick it off with a question to you in terms of, especially from that experience. Tell us a little bit about your interaction with biomarker testing and CGP, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off, Catalina. Over to you.
Absolutely. Well, first, thank you, Bill, for this intro, and Philomena, Cassandra, for the invitations. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here and share the perspective. Again, as you say, Bill, I bring a somewhat unusual perspective to this panel because I have experienced genomic testing from 3 different perspectives: as a physician, as a genomic scientist working for 25 years in the field of genomics, and as most importantly, I will say, as a breast cancer patient. And when I was diagnosed with breast cancer in April 2023, I really found myself on the other side of the healthcare system. Despite all my scientific knowledge, I really experienced the same fear, same vulnerability that every patient feels when is confronted with a cancer diagnosis. And very quickly, my cancer became much more than just a pathology report. It became deeply personal, and also, deeply personal from a scientific, from a patient, and from a medical doctor perspective. And like many women diagnosed with early breast cancer, one of the biggest questions I had when I was diagnosed and when I was going through the process of defining the treatment was if chemotherapy was needed or not in my case, and if genomics could inform that decision. And indeed, I had the opportunity to get a 21 gene panel that provided key information to help estimate the risk of recurrence and to help define if I needed or not chemotherapy. In my case, I needed chemotherapy based on that genomic profiling. And that, for me, was very important. Not just important to receive this information, it was important to receive this information on the right time and to guide the right clinical and treatment decision in my case. That was crucial. So that genomic test really directly informed if I needed chemotherapy, and really provided confidence, scientific evidence for those decisions. So as a patient, access to genomic testing means much more than just a policy discussion. For policymakers, for scientists like me too, for clinicians like me, most of the time, biomarker testing and genomic testing represents innovation. We discuss about infrastructure, evidence generation, healthcare spending. For patients, genomic testing represents clarity, represents avoiding treatments that are not needed. Whenever you don't need chemotherapy, well, you shouldn't be getting chemotherapy. It represents accessing to life-changing new and innovative treatments. It represents having confidence. And for me, again, confidence is what's the most important. So my genomic journey as a patient started with that 21 gene panel, but it didn't end it there. In addition, I got a comprehensive genomic profiling. I actually, through the POG and Marathon of Hope, had the opportunity to get the whole genome of my tumor sequence. And that provided a much deeper understanding of the molecular characteristics of my cancer and informed the treatments I started to receive after chemotherapy. And it will also inform any future developments that I may have. Hopefully, I will never have a recurrence, but if I do, that genomic profiling will be critical for any access to new medications, new treatments. So all that experience taught me that genomic testing is not the destination. And that's a big change for me because as a scientist, genomics is almost the end point. You want to generate data, you want to generate the evidence. For me, is the starting point, is the beginning of a journey towards a true personalized oncology and personalized cancer care. So in fact, some of you heard that a few weeks ago at ASCO, they presented, and one of the highlights, I was so pleased from ASCO, was the Optima clinical trial. And the Optima presented the results on the Prosigna test. I always say Prosigna started in BC. For those of you that recall or the history of Prosigna test, lots of people like I got Oncotype DX, which is a 21 gene panel. Prosigna is a 50 gene panel. And the Optima trial showed that it's clearly, the evidence on how critical this 50 gene panel or any comprehensive genomic testing is for defining recurrency risk and for deciding about chemotherapy. So for me, all these reinforce an important lesson that we, genomic scientists, have understood for many years. And is really more information leads to better decisions. And well, in my case, I add and brings confidence to patients. So as our knowledge in cancer biology continues to grow, we need to move beyond a single marker into a more comprehensive. This example between Prosigna and Oncotype shows more information is really better. However, as a patient, not everything was rose garden. I also had the opportunity to discover lots of gaps and challenges. I personally was fortunate to understand genomics. I knew what questions to ask to my clinician. I had a wonderful oncologist that is passionate and knowledgeable about genomics. I had access to, I was living in Vancouver, had access to a cutting edge cancer agency, but many Canadians don't have these advantages. Access to comprehensive testing, genomic profiling across Canada remains uneven, and we know that. Availability often depends on where you live, what type of cancer you have, which institution do you attend, who is your oncologist. Is your clinical team aware and ready to help you access those tests? So patients in Canada should not have to become experts in genomics. They should not have different opportunities depending where they live. And they should not face delays. Time is of the essence in genomic testing, though they should not face any delays. And we know that the evidence supporting comprehensive genomic testing continues to grow. We know that targeted therapies continue to emerge, but implementation continues to remain very, very fragmented across Canada. We still face challenges related to reimbursement, laboratory capacity, workforce, education, data sharing, clinical integration, regulatory process, and you name it. Lots of challenges, equity being one, as I mentioned, one of the biggest ones. We didn't even talk here about minority groups. That's another big challenge. But we have also enormous, great opportunities. Canada has the world-class scientists, clinicians, laboratories, patient advocates, policymakers, health systems. So we have everything it takes to really advance this implementation. And as we discuss now at this panel, the implementation, I would encourage us to keep one principle at the center. Comprehensive genomic testing, again, is not the end. The end is to use that data to improve outcomes for patients. Every discussion should be about how are we improving those outcomes. And I guess with that, my cancer journey really convinced me once more of the power of genomics and that genomics can change lives. And I am a living example of that power. It helped me really define the chemotherapy. I went into chemotherapy, lost my hair, had all the side effects with confidence that that's exactly what I needed. It's informing my treatments that I'm receiving right now. It's helping, hopefully, if I ever need it, guide any future treatments. And most importantly, as I say, it gave me confidence that they were not treating breast cancer in general. They were treating my breast cancer, my own specific tumor, the molecular profile of my tumor. So many challenges before us, but we need to ensure, of course, equitable access to all, because again, precision oncology, precision medicine should not be a privilege available only to a few Canadians. It should be standard of care available to all Canadians across regions, jurisdictions, provinces, and territories. And thank you. I think with that, Bill, I don't know if I went a bit too long, but
no, that was terrific.
Yeah.
Catalina, you set up our next panelist who, I mean, everyone at CRAN, of course, is familiar and on the screen, Cassandra. And that's because not every patient that you help or work with or that even, interact with CRAN has the background and expertise that Catalina. I would say 99.9% of them don't. And so some of the equity and inclusion challenge that Catalina put up for this panel, I'd like you to pick up on that, Cassandra, and talk about what is the biggest opportunity to make topic identification intake more inclusively, especially for patients, patient groups, clinician-led requests that may not have the same resources or industry backing or large institutions. And again, kudos to Laura for the two pilot projects that may be examples of that. But Cassandra, what is CRAN doing to help answer to the challenge that Catalina raised.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. And Catalina, thank you so much for sharing your personal experience. That was very well spoken, well said. So just for a little bit of context for my perspective on this particular panel, as Laura kindly mentioned during her presentation, CRAN led a rather robust patient feedback submission where we collated and synthesized feedback on behalf of 15 patient groups and provided it to CDA during the consultation. And that's the lens that I'll be taking for this discussion. First and foremost, I want to say that the inclusion of patients and advocacy groups as requesters is critical, as patient groups and individual advocates are often the first to identify the access barriers. So certainly we applaud CEA's position on this. Getting into kind of some of the equity-based stuff that you're asking about, Bill, the use of a standardized evidence submission form, certainly an important step towards establishing consistency. That said, the form itself is still very technical, and that lends itself to reduced accessibility, particularly for some of the grassroots patient organizations, and for individual people that have lived experience and would like to be able to provide input, but maybe don't have the expertise like Catalina does. Some examples of that are asking questions about cost or estimated number of patients impacted, clinical validity. These are not necessarily accessible to patient organizations or individuals from the public, and it may actually disproportionately deter smaller groups or individual patients from providing input. So I think that to maximize, really diverse and robust engagement, the process should not create undue burden and remain accessible for patient groups and for clinicians. I will comment as well that the patient perspective section on the form is left as an optional section kind of at the end of the document. And this makes it feel, a little bit more like an afterthought versus providing that kind of meaningful feeling of inclusion that I know you are going for. To get back to your question, Bill, in terms of the biggest opportunity, I think really including patients and patient groups in every step of the process is the biggest opportunity. And beyond kind of the more obvious reasons why, if we step back for a minute and kind of look at CDA big picture, it's not just about the published criteria, right? It's about the fairness of how the criteria are applied. And CDA documents, they often address criteria quite extensively, but only briefly touch on the processes. And greater and more meaningful engagement with both patients and patient groups can help to increase that transparency and increase the inclusivity. And under Laura's leadership, I think we've seen progress towards more meaningful patient engagement. So some examples of that are the webinars that were hosted last year that were intended directly for patient groups prior to the draft framework being released. That said, patient inclusion and engagement is not yet adequate. And as CDA looks to implement the framework, it's really my hope that we can see more structured involvement by patients themselves, patient groups, and even the public in every decision along the pathway. Things like inclusion in the genomics community of practice, for example, would be a meaningful step forward. Patients could co-design forms, consent language, and participate actively in the deliberation meetings. I think that's really important. I think it will help to build further public trust, and it will ensure that the recommendations that come forward are truly rooted in patient priorities and values and demonstrate meaningful inclusivity of patient voices. As well as representation of kind of more broad and diverse perspectives and expertise, as well as lived experiences. And then I will just say before I wrap up here, the conference is focused on CGP. So I just want to get this in as I kind of close out my thoughts and address the idea of future proofing within the framework. I feel compelled to reiterate the idea, and Laura touched on this during her presentation, but I want to reiterate the idea that if large panel CGP were a standard of care for all metastatic cancer patients in Canada, we would see such critical efficiency gains across so many areas in our healthcare systems, not the least of which would be this HTA process.
Thanks so much, Cassandra. That was an amazing reflection. And I want to just jump the order briefly to give Laura a quick chance to respond, especially on where the patient considerations or patient input has an impact on the different domains. I've spent a lot of time in and around CDA and how all of your other expert committees work. The patient perspective is now fed into each one of those. It's not its own separate point in the deliberative framework and order of discussion. It's actually been brought into all. And Laura, do you want to quickly comment on that and respond to Cassandra, and then we're going to hear from the clinician on the line?
If I can hit mute, I will. Yes. So thank you, Cassandra. I mean, those are very insightful comments and very well spoken, very well taken by the organization. I think you've highlighted, a lot of interesting points in terms of the technicalities of some of the work that we do and how to make these things more accessible to patients. And maybe I can save some of those comments for later. I guess I want to be sure to answer your question directly, Bill. And this is something that we discussed quite a bit, and it's probably apparent if you spent time with the framework, that the patient perspectives don't show up just in one space. There is the patient perspective to bring to questions even around analytic validity and what that means and how that shows up in clinical utility and clinical validity. And that's why we have these as cross-cutting criteria. The challenge is always kind of, how do we move that through deliberations and ensure that we actually talk about patient perspectives and patients' interpretation of the evidence and what that means on the ground in practice. And so some work that we were doing with our deliberative committees to support their use and uptake of information around preferences and perspectives and value and meaning and all of this as we deliberate through the work. So it's more of those procedural stuff, kind of that behind the doors, like what does deliberation look like in practice? And through documentation of our deliberative process. I mentioned we have this publicly facing document about how our committees, our expert committees, deliberate. Through tools like this and some consistency that we're doing, working across the different deliberative committees that we have at the organization, we're trying to be sure to give this type of information the right weight and the right value at the right times in the process.
Thanks so much, Laura. That was great. Charlene, I mean, you use and have been implementing, personalized medicine for a long time, and you've got new tools that are coming online every day. What do you think of the framework in terms of what it might mean for your practice in the clinic? And what parts are most likely to improve decision making? Where do you see risks around implementation, timing, or access? Because I mean, it's you're ordering these tests. But any early comments on the framework and what it might actually mean for you in practice?
Yeah, thank you, Bill. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be a part of this panel. I'm learning so much, and to follow up on hearing about Catalina's lived experience and what CRAN has done to really uplift patient voice in this deliberation. It's really very positive. And I think, first of all, thank you to Laura for her really great presentation and outlining sort of why this came about. And I think kind of reminding ourselves that it was an acknowledgement of the inequity that exists in biomarker testing across Canada. And I know that we are wanting to envision a state where we're talking about comprehensive genomic testing for every patient with metastatic disease. But I do understand the reasoning for why it was focused on looking at individual biomarkers, because that's the framework in which in Canada we fund biomarker testing. So, you have as you heard, there's a framework for drug approval based on evidence, and then you have this, companion diagnostic framework for funding. And so that makes sense to me. But at the same time, the science is moving so quickly. Like we're talking not biomarker, like we don't order individual biomarkers anymore, right? We order panels, but now we're talking about CGP and liquid biopsies. And so I think the challenges are that, can this keep up with science, right? And I think usually it's not the science that's the rate limiting factor, it's the implementation. And so I'll come back to what, one of the really strengths of the framework as it's been positioned is the highlight on transparency, equity, equity, equity. We've heard this just this morning. We've heard Catalina really emphasize it, and it's so true. What we need in Canada is that for every patient should have access to testing, not if you happen to be in an academic center, and which is the reality. So I think so clinically, I think this is a very positive step forward. I mean, I think we have to iterate and kind of build on that. This has brought together really important interest holders in this process, and so you kind of have a foundational framework to build on. For me clinically, I think there's also, a reality that, because we are in a publicly funded healthcare system, the fact that companion diagnostic biomarker testing and linked treatment exists is because then if you find an actionable mutation, then you can offer a patient treatment that's funded. And so I think one of the other implementation things we have to think about is if we're broadening testing, but don't have a companion therapeutic or don't have a companion funded therapeutic, what does that system look like, right? And how right now, a big motivation is, can we get patients on trial? Like, if we find something and we don't have a funded option, can we get patients on trial? But practically speaking, that is not a solution for many patients. And I think that's another bucket of like really trying to think about, is there a mechanism for like an N of one trial? Like, can we provide a framework where patients can have access to treatment truly individualized to their unique profile? So those are I won't say the things that keep me up at night, but make me kind of wonder, like, what does that implementation look like?
Yeah, well, I think you touched a bit on the future proofing aspect of this. Comprehensive genetic profiling or major assays with 50 different tests at the same time, right? So what if only 30 of those are relevant for which, what treatment choices you're going to have? At the same time, Catalina, you said you want more information, and just in case another door could open or you could get on a trial, maybe test number 35 might be relevant to you, if I heard correctly. I'm really excited about the mRNA immuno-oncology combinations that are going to be prophylactic potentially for the future, very personalized, right? Where's biomarker testing going to help inform which one of those? You can't call them vaccines yet, but
Yeah,
I like the future proofing look ahead aspect of what you're saying, Charlene.
Yeah, that's not even biomarker testing anymore, because you're like engineering a treatment based on that profile. So it's a different level. But I think the future proofing, I think it's alluded to earlier. I think, to me, if there's an opportunity for a next step, it is looking at multi-gene and comprehensive genomic profiling, and because that is the framework that is in the current and immediate near future, and where we, like standardization is so important. Like this interprovincial variability is very distressing. And it's distressing for patients, it's distressing for providers. We're like often clinicians, and you hear this province, oh, I can do that, but I can't do that. It's not, that's not the health system that we all aspire to be a part of. So the equity piece is really important, is really thinking about solutions that can be implemented. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't be aspirational and things have to start somewhere, but the transparency and equity piece is like just
Yeah.
spot on, so important.
That's a great segue to Laura Greer in terms of, you know, you're an expert in the health system, health policy, and communications. Makes me think a little bit of Catalina, who expert in the science and genomics. You know, you've been around and helped advocate for others for many years, and then all of a sudden you became a patient yourself, and that's just an incredible story. So thank you for being so public and brave to bring that forward, and to you, Catalina, as well. Given both your expertise and your experience as a patient, you know, how can you answer to that scale and equity challenge that Charlene and Cassandra and Catalina have already laid out?
And thanks, Bill. And I will say everyone's covered kind of, I think, from different angles, the key pieces here. But I'll say, and I was diagnosed de novo with metastatic breast cancer November 21. We all know what was going on in the world right there, result of a delayed mammogram. So did end up right at stage 4. So I will also underline a point that I know, Cassandra, you touched on, and Philomena, you have, is particularly for metastatic or advanced cancer patients, the need to actually have all the information so you could know what could be next is so important. I think a piece, Catalina, you said, and I was thinking of this a lot in preparation, is I also think from a patient perspective, we have a right to know our information. So even if it does not have a therapy attached to it at this moment, like, you want to know where there could be what's coming. And I think that's the biggest piece from the patient perspective, reflecting on the framework and the work. First, it's incredibly important because the big issue is equity and timeliness across the country. I am, as you said, Bill, have been working in health advocacy and policy for over 25 years. I am at Princess Margaret Cancer Center, and I know my experience would be different if I lived somewhere else in the country. I also know that, and I'm pretty sure, Catalina, you paid out of pocket for testing that you needed. And that choice, and I think to me, that is the number one piece that needs to drive it, is it does matter your socioeconomic, where you live. Are you actually going to benefit where science is taking us? And that's the other piece from the patient perspective. And I think Laura, we did see in the patient input on the framework, the key piece is timeliness and equity. If we look at it, it does feel like we are at risk of being left behind of where science is taking us, because it takes us so long to adopt where it's going. And it seems to just be incremental additions versus how do we change how we do testing up front. I'll give a plug, even though I know it's not the particular focus here. Really the need for more widespread adoption of liquid biopsy as a method of for patients. It makes such a difference. And you'll hear in my panel, the next panel, where I'll talk about more my experience. My tissue sample was too small to get, which would have been in a study at Princess Margaret, to get my tumor sequenced. But being able to see what liquid biopsy can be used for monitoring, for diagnosis, all of that, just we need to accelerate how that is being used across the country. And then I think, Bill, the other one from a patient perspective, and I know Laura Weeks, this is outside CDA's realm, and I know Dr. Gill, you touched on this as well. What do the provinces and the cancer systems do to implement it? Like, it's great to have frameworks and recommendations, but if it doesn't get in practice, if it's not funded so people can access it, if patients don't understand and don't have a voice in what they need, we're really not actually giving everyone the same shot at where they need to be for outcomes.
Yeah, and that seems like a really common theme coming forward, Laura, especially kicking it off with Catalina, where you're coming from too. And I mean, you had a different cancer journey because of your expertise, background, and geographic location in Canada. your participation on calls like this, webinars that are across Canada, and kudos to CRAN again for webcasting this, because I think that answers some accessibility for people in Yellowknife who can't fly to Toronto for a conference. Hopefully your generosity will go some way to giving them a few of the tools that they need to participate, contribute, and know about this. I don't think a lot of patients even know that this is an opportunity.
We've done some work and about to do some more with CRAN and with Don Husaro just on the state of readiness. And we did it with the first report. The number of people who are living with cancer or family members who did not even know what that was, there was, as we call it in the communication, like huge white space. There was so much that people didn't know about it. I have had the opportunity, I actually had reached out to Catalina on some of this work in the past because she'd written on LinkedIn after she was diagnosed. And I'd been working the lung cancer community and others. And I'm like, you know what? People don't all come with Catalina's medical and genetic background. But even I found, I worked at Sick Kids for 10 years in the Research Institute side at the height of the Human Genome Project. You'd think I'd even know I'd worked on biomarkers with lung cancer patients. Then I was diagnosed, and I can remember saying, are there any biomarkers? Literally, because I'd written questions for patients to ask their doctor. But then I actually had to ask, like, what's the difference from the hereditary cancer testing that I got because I was young and had cancer in both breasts versus the other genomic profiling of the tumor? So I'm what you would call a literate health consumer, or I've worked in this space a lot. And there's so much that we need to do to let everyone have the best chance to be their own advocate on how do we explain what this science is, what this means, how do you navigate the system? It's not easy. So there's so much work for all of us to do, and appreciative of everyone's time, because I do think like the thing that kept me from totally losing it when I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer with young children and all that was science really has exploded in cancer. So we need to take advantage of that.
Yeah, giving people a shot as science is really pushing the limits of what we ever thought was possible, and quickly. Laura, looking around this incredible screen here, what are some of the insights, thoughts, or maybe even queries that you're going to bring back as this project moves forward at CDA? Anything jump out at you?
Several things. I think, first of all, very grateful to CRAN for having me, not only present the framework, but also be part of this discussion. And selfishly, this is a great learning opportunity for us to hear from the people who are impacted by the framework. And so lots of great takeaways, I think, so far. I've just jotted down, a few different ideas that I'll share back. And, I think, Catalina, you've highlighted really well the number of places in the health system where genetics has the potential to influence care in a really meaningful way. And also, I think Laura and Catalina both, just what knowing these test results actually means for people in so many different ways, not just to inform treatment, but how that information can impact you in your daily lives and your well-being now, but also in the future. Confidence, clarity, these are some concepts that we will bring back. And Catalina, I appreciate your framing that testing is just the beginning of the journey. And so that's a really important framing, I think, that we can take forward in our work. Cassandra, I think you are very familiar with the framework, and I know you spend a lot of time with it, so I really appreciate your targeted feedback. Some things that I will take back here, in addition to what we've already sort of observed from CRAN's submission with other patient groups as well, is just really the technicalities of that intake process. And when I think forward, I probably didn't talk too much about it in my presentation, but through the proof of concept exercises, it's really the criteria and the deliberative process that we're testing, not yet the intake process. So that is sort of a future step for us. And I think what I learned from you is that we need to involve patients in developing that process to be sure that it works for everybody. And I appreciate as well, I mean, it's easy to say, let's involve patients, but you're very concrete in some of your suggestions in terms of what that actually may look like and what are some meaningful steps that we could actually take. Charlene, I really appreciated your call out that this is a system that we're working in, the biomarker approach, but then give us some pause to bring back to the organization, how do we keep up with the science? What is our role to keep up with the science? And yeah, how do we help move our health systems along? I mean, I am very aware that we're just one player in a complex health system, certainly a federated system as well, which can complicate things. And so how can we work together with different partners to meaningfully keep up with the science when at the same time we know that health systems have many different priorities and many different barriers. And, these approval and adoption decisions are just one piece of the puzzle. We know that labs are strained in terms of resources and infrastructure and whatnot as well. But I think this is one of the goals of working with the community of practice that we've established with some partners is what can we do at a pan-Canadian level? What's within the CDA's realm and what are some conversations that we can start with other partners in the system. And Laura, I really appreciate your comments as well. Again, really reinforcing what testing can mean for people on the ground, but also encouraging us to keep an eye to the future, new technologies. We hear about digital pathology, we hear about ctDNA, but we haven't yet begun to kind of scratch those surface, to go beyond sort of scratching the surfaces. And so we know this is the beginning, and I think everybody appreciates that. And then I appreciate, that understanding. We do have a way to go to develop a system that can, or to support the development of a system that can appropriately allow access to genetic testing and the science that, patients are letting us know is there, and now is the time for, to provide appropriate access. So if you,
Thanks so much,
yeah,
Laura.
sorry,
You
no,
keep on
that's
going. We have one audience question, and I'd encourage
okay.
others to
Let's
get
do
them
that.
into Cassandra too. But Laura, go ahead if you want to finish your thought there.
No, I was going to say kind of where to from here, but I can see if that comes up in the Q&A, and we'll pass it on to the audience questions.
Yeah, I think it'll come up in the closing remark. Actually, where to from here is really important. It was a process question that came in from one of the delegates. How will biomarker assessments be performed in parallel to the drug review? And what if there are discrepancies between the drug recommendation and the biomarker recommendation? If you could just, you mentioned briefly companion diagnostics versus another type. I think this is more of a process question about what happens if there's some mismatch between the two.
Yeah, no, really good question. And this is one of the things that we need to test as we work through the proof of concepts and, learn from our application of the framework in different settings. It's certainly our intention moving forward that if there is a drug that comes through for reimbursement review and it has a companion diagnostic associated, that we would do an assessment with the framework at the same time. What I'm hearing from jurisdictions in this regard is that if the drug is approved, the chances the test being approved are pretty solid, but where we might be able to add value is to provide some guidance in terms of implementation, analytic parameters, and these sorts of things. So, but still value in hearing from an independent group like CDA that please fund this test, because that, those recommendations can be used to support funding cycles and different budgets and whatnot. So that is our intention moving forward. The other area that we're trying to explore is what we call these complementary biomarker testing. So the HRD and the MRD that we're running the proof of concepts for, these are examples. So not in the same way as a companion diagnostic to inform treatment eligibility, but to inform other aspects of the care pathway. So MRD, for example, treatment discontinuation. So again, we're focused on a different payer with our recommendations. And so that's who we're trying to target these recommendations for, whether or not they might be aligned with a companion test or a complementary test.
Got it. Laura, you mentioned, and you're going to be mentioning it later, liquid biopsies and how important and awesome that is. Can you see some of the tests that would be done through that methodology really fit into this? And is this framework going to help advance what you're banging the drum for right now on liquid biopsies?
I think we need to do the work that CDA's done to set that framework, but then I think it's that important perspective of what is the patient journey, or what did they go through to actually do the testing, and how do we do the testing in a way that, yes, cost effective, all of those pieces that we need to look at from a public system, but also what allows a patient to be living this best. And it's not even just quality of life. And I know this isn't on genomic testing, but I'll bring it up on everyone. I have not stopped working since I was diagnosed 4.5 years ago. I'm on targeted treatment, which is not covered by the Ontario government because it's oral. And I think, again, we need to always look at our decisions on what does it actually mean for the patients, how they live, how they access the health system, how they do their roles, that. And just liquid biopsy is something that you're already getting blood work and things there. And if we can get the information we need from a less invasive way, a less traumatic way for some patients, I heard that a lot from the lung cancer patients, we should try to make sure we incorporate those perspectives on our decisions on how do we get the information to do the testing.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Catalina, any thoughts from you in terms of where the science of genomic testing has progressed? I know you were almost clapping when Laura mentioned liquid biopsies, but
Yes.
where's the science and genetics going to actually I don't know, provide the the feedstock for this input, throughput, output that it is science that seems to be coming very quickly.
Yes, Bill, and thanks for that. And yes, I was clapping, and Laura and I often, very synchronized. But liquid biopsy is big, and I can say it from, again, from the excitement of a patient and the excitement of scientists. I haven't actually myself had access to that, and that's one of the things that I could potentially pay for, but I don't want to pay because I want to make sure that that we're pushing the system in a way that the system is really ready to provide these for patients. I think this is going to be liquid biopsy is going to be critical, or ctDNA, test for minimal residual disease are going to be critical for, ensuring we can understand treatment efficacy. That's big. And that goes to quality of life and should I continue getting treatments or not, and all that, Laura mentioned. I think it's also big in a way in prevention because it could help early detection. It could help guide lots of the clinical decisions. Countries like the UK and the US are far ahead in implementing, circulating tumor DNA liquid biopsy. I think there is a great opportunity for Canada on that. So that's top number one in my list of where genomics is going. And if we can get, I imagine, if we can imagine a future where we can get this type of test instead of $6,000 a test, maybe, I don't know, $500 a test, $100 a test. Imagine what we could do with that level, of cost, and how we could implement these in an equitable and really broad manner. That's one area I wanted to comment. And the other one, I also want to pick up on a comment that Laura made on the right patients have to get the information. And that's a battle everywhere in Canada, getting our reports, getting our, results, getting our files, getting access through, the provinces. Some provinces have apps, some others like BC, we're starting now to put together an app, but there's nothing like for patients. I have a file on my hard disk, on my laptop. That's my medical file. We're in 2026, and do I need to be chasing faxes and scanning with my phone reports to have my medical file? And in particular around genomics, is my DNA, is my information. And yet here we are, I got whole genome sequence, but if I need an hereditary cancer panel, that is contained in that whole genome because the whole genome has everything. But the whole genome belongs to the Marathon of Hope and POG, and we cannot extract the hereditary cancer panel from there. If that information was mine and I could go, and share this with whomever I think I should be sharing it, maybe we could, I don't know, maybe not all patients will be able, I understand that I am, a scientist, I'm passionate about this, but I think there is a real need for patients to have that basic information about their reports. And sometimes we think, oh, they don't understand. I'm sorry, patients understand. When you're facing cancer and when you're facing a live, changing diagnosis like cancer, and with many other patients understand much more than sometimes we granted. And so I think information empowering is part of the helping empower those patients. So
That's great.
CTDNA and info. Sorry for the long
No,
answer.
that's okay. I mean, there's so many. I see people taking down notes. I'm sure I see people on the line who are taking down notes. I can't even see them. Charlene, are patients coming to your clinic and to the oncology teams with some of these questions that have brought up? Has it been increasing? And then are you being asked, what questions should I ask? And then you give them a list. Like, how are you empowering patients who maybe aren't as sophisticated as Laura, Catalina, and the others?
Yeah, I think it's a really important discussion with no easy answer. Like, I think there are practical realities within how patients are moving through the system and trying to manage those volumes, right, while we're trying to provide that personalized care. Typically to be honest, I will refer patients to organizations like CRAN, like patients who have who want more information. I think that they can be navigated very well through peer support. We have a discussion about biomarker testing for every patient, and we'll talk about what's publicly funded. I ask in my practice patients up front, do you have capacity to self-pay? Like, what is your reality? And some patients will be like, I only want to know what's funded. Other patients will be like, I want to know and make a choice about whether I want to pay for that and what that would look like. And more the latter, for sure, more the latter. So I do ask that question. We used to say always ask patients, do you have extended health? And now we kind of go into the, what is your preference in terms of, wanting, because if you don't ask that preference up front, it can be very morally distressing for patients to say to them, hey, look, you can go to Life Labs and get Signatera and it's $6,500 for the first, so we have to frame it. So, and I do hear this, I don't want to call it push and pull because it's kind of on the same side, but between the desire for more information and the clinical framework, which we use for every test, not just biomarker testing, for blood tests, for CT scan, we're like, is this clinically actionable? Will it change management? Will it improve outcomes? Right? Those are the pivotal questions that have always defined health system intervention, right? We've been trained to ask that question when you order a scan and you order blood tests. And so that same framework does come to bear with genomic testing. At the same time, I appreciate what we hear when we say, well, I just want all that info, and it's my right to process that information and know what I want to do with it. And I think this is an evolving landscape, and we have to probably adapt our framework to that landscape and understand what patients need to navigate. Patients want to be empowered. We want shared decision making. And another common phrase I tell my patients is like, you are driving this bus. I am trying to provide you the directions, right? But at the end of the day, which way you turn, I want them to feel that control. And I use that analogy a lot, and they kind of get it because it's, I don't have to tell this audience, it's so overwhelming, all that information coming at you and trying to know what to do. I think an empowered patient, who asks the right questions, makes a huge difference, right? I've had patients, ask really great, like just so curious and ask really good questions. And then I'm like, oh, maybe that is oh, we should think about that trial, or we should think about this. So I'm a full advocate for, we need to empower patients. We need to be able to provide them the tools to ask those questions. I'm really appreciative, again, to groups like CRAN that provide that level of support for patients. So sometimes if I'm kind of feeling overwhelmed, I'll be like, let me connect you with Phil.
That's amazing, Charlene. I mean, we're going to head into the closing question for the panel, which is, what is one action that you would like to see for this to become a reality for more patients across the country in terms of access to the right tests, and turn the framework from a policy framework into action? What actually has to happen? I'm going to go first, and,
Can I
and my
start?
vote. I want.
Okay, you go
Well,
first.
yeah, then you can start, and we're going to have them really quick. I want more empathetic, generous, and curious clinicians like you, Charlene, for more patients across the country. That's my vote. I know I don't have a magic wand to make that happen, but just thank you for being such a thoughtful leader and helping patients drive the bus in the way that they can. And yeah, look, again, Catalina, I can always count on you for the very emphatic gestures. But you can go first with your action, and then we're going to go around the horn and we're going to close it out.
So I think one action that I think from a transparency lens, I think it would be great if we had like a dashboard, a publicly available dashboard that outlined what is the publicly funded biomarker testing available in each province, because I think it calls to task those provinces that are where there's greater inequity to meet a certain benchmark. And I think we don't, it's quite hidden, that degree of interprovincial variability.
Awesome. Okay. Charlene got the dashboard. Who wants to go next to help close it out? One action to turn this from framework to reality for more Canadians. Catalina.
Yes, and Bill, yes, I'm Latino, so my hands are always important, will be always part of my conversation. But I would say, putting equity at the center of our discussions. And it's not just a buzzword that is now fashioned to talk about equity, is really thinking and putting strategies around who can access and how can we ensure equitable access to these technologies across Canada. That's one of the biggest challenges. And I think every step, every strategy, every initiative, every panel, every conversation should have equity really at the center.
Yeah, well, this one certainly has. Thank you, Catalina. That's terrific.
I can jump in next. I'd like to reflect not on the framework itself, but the actual scope of the framework. And this is something Laura and I have chatted a little bit about. But the patient groups that we collaborated with really felt strongly that recommendations and encouragement are not enough. Cancer is the leading cause of mortality in Canada. It contributes significantly to morbidity throughout our country, and it has devastating personal, social, and economic impacts. And we need to act with vigor and to ensure that the framework really does have a tangible impact. Some kind of mechanism should be in place so that provinces and territories should be required to negotiate pricing and access based on CDA's recommendations within a fixed time frame, or publish a rationale for as to why not.
Okay. Thanks, Cassandra. I'd like to say that's super actionable, but just keep up the good work there, and I'll be there with you, because that's a tough task, right, Laura? But it's one. Laura, do you want to go next?
Which Laura? Weeks?
You can flip a coin, whoever's
I'll go quickly just to go, because I endorse everyone's suggestions, but I will say timeliness is the key piece that I would underline from the patient perspective. And Bill, this is a throw to you. We did see the G7 leaders all endorse a call to action on cancer just on Wednesday of this week. So also hoping for the political buy-in to make this a priority to see the action that we need.
Yeah, I like that political buy-in and a sense of urgency and timeliness. Thanks, Laura. Laura Weeks, you get to close this panel out.
With just one thing, that's a tall order after getting all the great feedback from these folks. So maybe I will say, Charlene, we are working on an inventory. Harder than we think to pull that information together because the data are not there in kind of a consolidated way. Maybe I'll just make a few shout outs to some things that we're thinking about next. I would like to see this move beyond cancer to other types, because we know that targeted therapies are certainly being developed in other disease areas. I'm really curious to see where the proof of concept will land with jurisdictions. Do they see value? Will they want us to keep us doing this moving forward? So we have an evaluation plan to help inform those next steps. And then last, I'll just say something that's near to my heart is trying to bridge that gap between the drug reimbursement pathways and the testing reimbursement pathways, and try and bring some more alignment and coordination forward. So we'll be seeing what we can do to support those conversations moving forward.
Excellent. I think everyone who is attending this CRAN conference is leaving at least this session with a lot more information and food for thought. I'd encourage everyone to continue the conversation. And it sounds like Cassandra and Philomena, your inbox is ready to receive the input that's going to come forward on this. And that means, Laura, you're going to be busy too, in terms of the continuous improvement that CDA has shown to be focused on. At one point, I think I counted 18 different change management or projects that were underway at CDA, and I was probably undercounting. Sudha can probably correct me, but you're keep it up. Thank you for being so engaged and coming out to this kind of thing, presenting so well, and then yeah, the conversation will continue. Thank you again, Philomena and Cassandra, for the opportunity, and to the expert panelists who joined us. We'll see you all again soon, either in person or virtually. And let's make this a reality for more Canadians in terms of better access to the right cancer therapies. And this is one step in that direction. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bill, and to all my co-panelists. That was a really great discussion. I really enjoyed that. And just to circle back to what Catalina and Laura shared, is something we hear so often from patients, that genomic data brings hope for patients. And that came through loud and clear through this session.